Good morning, friends. The third thing we learned about what it means to inherit the kingdom of God is that we get to be ruled by God. And a question that might come out of that might be, but aren't we already ruled by God? Isn't God already the God of heaven and earth doing whatever he pleases? And that's true. He is, and he does. Psalm 115 and Psalm 135 make that abundantly clear. And so, with that in mind, why would we say that being under God's rule is something that we will get to experience as in future tense in the kingdom of God? Why should we make that distinction between now and then if God is, in fact, already ruling and reigning over everything? Well, the answer has to do with God's ultimate plan of redemption and the timing of his ultimate victory. Because we've been rightly talking about sin, whether our own sin or that first sin of Adam and Eve, we've been talking about sin in terms of rebellion. The idea being that when we sin, we aren't just doing something wrong as if there was this arbitrary set of rules that we've broken, but rather that when we sin, the reason it is wrong is because that sin is an action, whether done in thought, word, or deed, that goes against God himself. Again, I cannot stress enough that sin is wrong not because it transgresses some sterile, disconnected, arbitrary set of cosmic moral rules. No, sin is wrong because it goes against the very nature of God himself. For instance, murder, which is the unjust taking of life, of human life, is wrong because God is both the God of life and the God of justice. Okay? Adultery is wrong because it is itself an expression of incredible unfaithfulness, and yet God is perfectly faithful. Coveting is wrong because it demonstrates a person's dissatisfaction with what they already have, and yet God is the one who's provided what they have. And so through coveting, we are telling God that he has failed in his provision, that we believe he has not been gracious enough or loving enough or whatever along those lines. So in these ways, we see that sin, it is wickedness because it is rebellion against God himself. And for the time being, God allows such rebellion to happen. He obviously allowed it to happen in the garden when Adam and Eve fell and so brought sin and death into the world and into the human race itself. And in fact, God created Adam and Eve knowing full well that this fall would take place because it was his ordained purpose, even before it actually happened, that he would use the sinfulness of mankind to actually produce and demonstrate ultimate good in the end. Because if mankind were not permitted to sin, if God made Adam and Eve without their own wills, without the ability to choose and so go their own way, if he did make them robots who had no capacity to turn away from him, then he would have no way to demonstrate to his creation that he is in fact a righteous God, both in terms of justice leading to the expression of his wrath, and in terms of mercy, leading to the expression of his grace. And so he created Adam and Eve. He created mankind innocent. Okay, he created them righteous. He did not create them sinful. He did not make them sin. He did not in any way compel them to sin. But he did create them with the capacity to turn away from him, with the ordained purpose of then using their rebellion to put on full display his own nature and character. And so God has been sovereign over all of this from the beginning, which is another way of saying that he has been reigning and ruling over every aspect of this since the beginning, and he's not stopped. However, because he permitted it, because he has an ordained purpose for it, God is reigning and ruling in this very moment in a way that is opposed. Now, to be sure, the opposition is not an equal and opposite opposition, as it were. People sometimes make the mistake of thinking that God is on one side and Satan is on the other. And so there's this cosmic struggle, always in doubt, a spiritual tug of war where sometimes God gets the advantage, other times Satan gets the advantage, and it just keeps on going back and forth. But please hear me when I say that is not what is happening. Yes, God's reign and rule is opposed by Satan and the other spiritual forces of darkness, as well as by sinful man. But God, again, is permitting that opposition to happen right now because he's going to use it as a part of that ultimate ordained purpose. So there's nothing equal and opposite happening at all. God's rule, yes, is being opposed, but that opposition has no hope whatsoever of actually overthrowing God or of even getting in the way of his purpose. In fact, despite all of the opposition and all of the visceral nature and the heated nature of that opposition, as we've already explained, the opposition itself is going to be used to accomplish God's purpose. Just think about Christ's death on the cross. That must be considered the enemy of God's greatest victory. He managed to kill Christ. And yet God takes that death on the cross and actually makes it the pivotal moment that secures salvation for all his people, to redeem his lost sheep back to himself. And so the enemy's greatest victory is actually used to bring that same enemy's greatest defeat, since God used the death of Christ to pay the price of his people's sin and then to gain victory over death itself through his resurrection. And so when Christ returns again, this time in clear and visible power and glory, he will bring that victory to its final culmination. In other words, he will claim that final victory once and forever, and his victory will be absolute. And that is when sin and death, along with Satan, along with all those other spiritual forces of evil, along with all those people who followed, the human people who followed those spiritual forces of evil in their rebellion, they will be once and for all vanquished, and the opposition will end. Which means that on the day of judgment and for all eternity afterward, God's rule and reign will go on unopposed. The fullness of time will be complete in terms of his redemptive purposes, because the moment of Christ's return to bring that ultimate victory is time such that every last one of his lost sheep will be found before he comes back, because he promised that he would not lose a single one that the Father had given to him. That's why he doesn't just come back right now. The Father's timing for his Son's return might seem delayed from our perspective, but it's actually already set, already fixed, lining up perfectly with the salvation of all his people. And then he returns, and the day of judgment takes place. And all those who remain in their rebellion, all those who oppose God in this life in an unrepentant way, they will be utterly conquered and cast into eternal punishment, as is their just consequence. But all those who sought Christ's salvation, his forgiveness for their sins, they will be transformed. They will be glorified, both body and spirit, such that no sin, no rebellion remains left in them. And so from that moment forward, there will be no more rebellion, no more opposition to that perfect rule and reign of God. And that means that all will be right with the world from that point on. Because sin itself, that rebellion, was the source of all the pain and sorrow and death and tragedy that makes things wrong with this world. But that sin and rebellion will be no more, which means the pain and sorrow and death and tragedy will be no more. We will be left only with God's rule and reign unopposed, which brings life and blessing and goodness and joy and fulfillment and peace. All of the good things unmingled, not mingled together with the bad things as it is right now. In any case, I pray that this helps explain the difference between God's rule and reign now versus his rule and reign in eternity. In both cases, both kind of time periods, if you want to think about it that way, in both time periods, he is ruling and reigning absolutely. Again, even today, it's not that he's doing his best, but some things slip away from him. No, even in this present time, there isn't a single thing that happens that is outside his ordained will. Because even in the case of those who oppose him, he still turns their evil to good. But on that glorious day, all the opposition will cease. He will bring the final and ultimate victory, and so there will no longer be any evil to turn into good. It will all be pure good all the time, because all the opposition will finally be conquered and done away with. So I pray that that's encouraging to you, to know that God is absolutely in control. He is absolutely sovereign and ruling and reigning even now, but a day is coming when that rule and reign will be in complete victory, and we will know only his rule without any opposition to it, not from the rest of the world, not from Satan, not even from the sin within ourselves. And I pray that that is encouraging indeed. With that, I also pray that you have a good and godly day, and Lord willing, I'll see you soon.